coming in the door, we'll just go ahead and get things going because Mike has a lot that he wants to share tonight regarding ramification, and it's you'll see the proof is in the pudding when he shares pictures of his trees. And I'm not going to take a long time introducing Mike because he's going to explain himself. So here he is.
I spent the first 20 years of my bonsai life as sort of a backyard bonsai guy. And, you know, I didn't really ever expect to be sharing trees. When I started in bonsai in the late 80s and early 90s, there were anything but pictures available and magazines and books. There wasn't any internet. There in Southern California, there were a lot of bonsai nurseries and clubs, but I really didn't know about them. So I learned most everything I have from either the Yamaguchi nursery, George Yamaguchi, and the Naka books. And then later on, I was introduced to the Ishis at Chikuru Inn. And then started doing workshops with Kinji later on. But I spent easily the first 20 years that was my only world as bonsai. Working in the backyard, I never showed trees. I have an undergraduate degree in both painting and sculpture from the San Jose State University, and then a master's degree in painting. And I spent the first 30 years after school trying to develop myself into the art world in Los Angeles as a painter. And I had moderate success, but by the time I turned 50, there was, it was pretty obvious I wasn't ever going to make a good living at it. And so I began to concentrate on other things and bonsai and work and saving money and doing all the things you need to do to sustain yourself, right? So I moved from painting, which had a possible chance, to bonsai, which had no chance. Makes a lot of sense, right? Was thinking ahead. So as I said, that the first 20 years or so of my life, I basically created bonsai in the backyard, and I did everything I could to save money to put against my painting career. So I tried to develop trees as economically as possible. And when it got to the point where I, would get trees in nursery stock for not very much money, and then instead of putting them into bonsai pots, I built wooden boxes and put them into these. And it wasn't because I was smart or knew anything. It was just made sense economically. I was making stretcher bars for paintings and all of that sort of thing. So it became really easy for me to rip down boards and, make boxes. And I didn't have money for benches, so I set them on the ground and it turns out that was really a smart thing to do for a lot of reasons. And so I'm going to go through tonight about, how to grow stuff in wooden boxes, what I have found the advantages of that to be. I usually in the beginning set my boxes on the ground, and that has advantages. And then later on, as things started to develop, I would put them up on wooden benches, and that had, some drawbacks, but it still worked. When I did finally move them into pots, then I will talk a little bit about that and what kind of soil mixes I use and all of that. Okay, so do I have control of that? Are you going? Okay. So the wooden boxes that I use are basically this is just redwood fence material. They're about 5/8 of an inch thick and 5.5 inches wide, and they're about dog-eared 6.5 feet tall. They work really. It's inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, and you can see that there's lots of advantages. You just staple screen in underneath. You get good drainage. The boxes themselves stay really moist, and when you set them on the ground, you still get good drainage, right? And it gives the opportunity for some of the finer roots to go through into the gravel and really jump starts the tree. It's an excellent way. I can't tell you how good trees get started in these kinds of things. Yes, sir.
You just mentioned that the boxes that you use are set on gravel.
I like to set them on pea gravel. on the ground. And I have about 3 inches of pea gravel on the ground in my nursery, my garden. And when you set the box on there, the roots just go right, still drains really well, but the roots get down into the gravel and they're happy, and trees just go like gangbusters. Yes, sir. Pardon me? I started off building them with drywall screws. You know, they're coarse and easy, but the wood itself is a little bit moist when you first buy it, probably from Lowe's or Home Depot. And so you have to pilot drill and be. There you go. You know, I was with Steve Iwaki, something like down in San Francisco, San Mateo, and he built all the wood boxes for our workshops, and he used old, you know, fence material that had come from somebody else, and I was surprised at how nice that stuff was. So old fence material would be really terrific. This is all new stuff, but I build these things by the dozens now, all the time. When you're working on smaller trees, it's really good to use, you know, because this stuff gets a little clunky on smaller material. It's good to use just cedar fence material. And cedar fence material comes 2 ways. It comes in 3.5-inch widths, and it also comes in 5.5-inch widths. And if you have a table saw, you can rip the stuff down to make it even smaller. But one of the things I like to do is to put in a really good drainage layer on my boxes. Okay, and then put the tree. I actually, there's 2 things I like to use, and that's, I can either use pumice and lava, or if you go to hydroponic stores, you can use those little round ceramic balls, and that stuff, if you get the small bag of that stuff, it ranges in size from like 1/4 inch, maybe even a little smaller, all the way up to 1/2 inch. And you can sift those and get the smaller stuff for smaller pots or shallow pots or some shallow boxes, and use the big stuff for the bigger trees and get a nice drainage layer. And that stuff does not break down. I mean, and in fact, that's kind of a drawback, because when you go to rebox or repot something and you're going and cleaning off the bottom, those little balls fall on the floor and roll around. It's like, but you can sweep them up and wash them off and use them again. And they're relatively inexpensive. You can get like a 20-pound sack of that stuff for about 16 or 18 bucks. And yeah, they're great. I would highly recommend trying that out. See if you how you like it. Okay. Yes, sir. Pardon me? You buy it in hydroponic stores, and they're like little round ceramic balls.
A quick point. The folks on the internet can't hear unless this mic is there. And so for their benefit, if you guys just give me a little bit of time to mic, that way the folks can hear it all.
Okay. I'll try to repeat the questions back. Just kick me if I don't. So I like to use I find the best results of boxes on the ground. Next best, and because you get all the fine roots down into the gravel, and that helps to really facilitate the growth. If you put them on wooden benches, you still get fine roots. You get good drainage and fine roots come through, but it slows them down. So I don't recommend that until you're starting to refine and you want to slow down the growth a little bit. So typically what I do is, like, when you're first starting out with, you know, maybe 3-gallon nursery stock, and you've got a lot of root building to do, and you're doing hard cuts on the trunk, and you're trying to, you know, seal up old wounds and stuff like that, then you want to really grow the tree as quickly as you can. As that, you begin to refine that, and you've established your branches and things, and you're starting to want to slow it down, move it up onto a bench. And then later on, when you're really happy that you're just about ready to go into a pot, maybe 8 or 10 years into the process, you can put little wooden feet on them and even slow it down a little bit more. Okay. Once you have established a good core root ball, tight, nice core root ball that's about ready to go into a pot, that's when you're going to start getting really small internodes and smaller leaves and all of the good stuff that you're looking for. And so that's why these are really, you don't have to buy a lot of pots and put trees into them and then repot into a little larger one, and you never use that puppy again, and so forth and so on. You just, these last for about 6 years, and then you can chuck them, you know, haven't got much invested in them. All right, let's go to the next slide. No? Okay. And we can go to the next one. And we've already done all of this. Is there any questions? Yes, sir.
Do you ever double pot? An example, you have a box and then you
Okay.
have another box with gravel in it.
Yeah, you could. So the question here is, say you don't have gravel on the ground and you wanted to like utilize the gravel idea for those, keep the drainage and all of that. So yes, sir, you could build like on the ground if you have room, put up some cedar block or cinder block, you know, and put gravel in there and set your trees in there like that. That's a good way to do it. Or if you are only have benches available to you, and say you had a box like this and you could just put gravel in there and set another, you know, another box in on top of it and utilize it that way, that should work just fine. I've never done that, but you know, I've often thought, you know, maybe I could save space and do that and, you know, utilize other parts of my yard that way. And so I really believe that would work just fine. Is there any other questions along that line? No? Okay, so soil mixes, and this is standard throughout the industry now. Everybody does this. You know, it's just a basic 1-1-1 mix, akadama, pumice, and lava. Okay. What on larger trees, you always want to get a good drainage layer going, right? Smaller trees, drainage is still really important, but it doesn't need to be as deep, right? So, you know, maybe you're going to put a 1/2 inch in the bottom of a small pot, but you may want to put 1 inch underneath a bigger tree. And I'm talking mostly now about deciduous and broadleaf evergreens. And those kinds of trees in my nursery, because it's really a Mediterranean climate, they like to stay really moist. They don't like to be wet. They like to be moist. And so what you're trying to do is create a soil mix that's going to retain water, but give you good aeration and good drainage all at the same time. So the lava and the akadama retain a certain amount of moisture and still facilitate good drainage. Okay. What the other thing I like to do is, as you get closer to the top, when you're putting your tree in, after you've tied it off and you've worked all the soil down into the box, you want to add in a little bit of organic material towards the top part, that last little layer that goes in, that 1/2 inch or so work. And what I like to use for organic material is like something like pine bark that's kind of coarse, or I use cocoa mix, which is the husk off of a cocoa bean. And that's kind of large and shell. What I like about the cocoa husk is that it breaks down and it actually feeds the roots, and they really grow nice. You get good fine roots all towards the top. And then I come back on after that and add in like a layer of sphagnum moss and cocoa husk over the top to kind of help hold the moisture in. And that works really, really good. Now, I don't know, you guys might not have up here in the Sacramento area a problem with things drying out really fast, or you do? So that's a good idea, baby. Okay. So deciduous, like I said, deciduous and broadleaf evergreens both really, really like to stay moist. And, you know, so frequent watering is kind of important, but you want to make sure that it's draining well so that they aren't sitting in muck. that would kill them. That cause root rot and give you all kinds of issues. So really good thick drainage layer and a little something to hold moisture at the top where you get all those nice fine roots. That's really wonderful. Any other questions? So, okay, so let's go to the next one. What I use to fertilize is Osmocote 14-14-14. And I like that because it's a nice slow release. Okay. Depending on the time of the year, it will work really, really good. If you are feeding in the winter time when it's cool out, it won't break down. It'll last for, 14 or 16 weeks. Are you all familiar with Osmocote? Do you know what that stuff is? Yeah, everybody uses that. Up here, you guys all have Apex that is, kind of formulated to act, for a little moister environment. I know that that's available in the Bay Area. It's also the Apex is like a 14-14-14, but it releases a little differently based on the moisture and stuff. So when it's hot out, the Osmocote breaks down a little faster. You water a little more often, and it's warm, and it normally lasts about 10 to 12 weeks. Okay. So, which is really kind of good because that's just about every time you want to touch the tree. About, every 3 months or so, you want to be in there kind of starting to prune what needs to be pruned and so forth and so on. So you just fertilize each time you touch, you need to do a profile pruning or something like that. I also like to add an organic material at the same time I feed with the Osmocote. And the organic material kind of gets to the tree systemically faster than the Osmocote releases. So you get a nice burst of energy, and then the Osmocote starts to work in after that, and it'll last for the period of time. And organic material is whatever you prefer, but fish emulsion, kelp, cakes, those Neptune cakes and stuff like that, they all work really well. So whatever you have been using that you like to use, I would continue to do that. But I've had really good luck with fish emulsion, back guano, things like that. Okay. There's, I was told by Bob Scheinman this year at the expo that he has found, like a little chicken manure pellet that's a lot like what the Green King used to be. Green King used to be my very favorite organic mix, but that's not really available anymore. That was imported from Japan, and they've shut them down. So it's these little pellets of chicken manure seem like a really, really good idea, and I'm looking into that. I know it's mostly available up in the Oregon area, and I don't know how hard it's going to be to import it into California because they're kind of fussy about stuff like that. But if you guys have access to that, it's called Nutri something. Are you familiar with that? No? I'm going to say it. Let me read it. Nutri-Rich. It's a 432, and they're little organic pellets. And the reason that would be good is if you're using a liquid fertilizer, then it's really important how you apply that. You want to water the tree really well first, and then come back maybe an hour or two later and put the fertilizer on, and because it's going to be another day or a day and a half before you come back to water again. And so that gives a plenty chance for the roots to bring it up. Okay. So that would be, this is a pellet that's going to break down a little bit over time and give you, that organic feed for like 2 or 3 weeks. All right. 432, it's chicken manure. So yeah, it's pretty light on the nitrogen, but it's good on the other minerals. So it really helps. Okay. So no more questions? Yes.
The Osmocote, is it Osmocote Plus, or is that
So
the same thing? It's
what I
different.
buy, the 14-14-14 doesn't say plus, it just says Osmocote 14-14-14, okay? And not every nursery carries that. So you might have to order it online, like from Amazon or something, but I guarantee you it's out there. No questions? Okay. The other thing I like to do, okay, is each time I am, pruning and fertilizing, I like to take off the top layer, all the sphagnum moss and everything, and place the fertilizer right on there, and then put my layer in on top of that. And that helps to keep that stuff moist and get down, start to break down faster and get into the tree quickly. So that's that top dressing layer kind of protects it, keeps it moist and going a lot faster. All right. We're blasting through this. You guys aren't asking me any questions. So next. So pruning depends on where you are in the development of the tree, right? If you're like what we were talking about earlier, if you're trying to grow a tree to cover scars and thicken the trunk and develop, you're going to prune less during the year than you are more mature trees. So newer trees, I like to prune those maybe twice, maybe 3 times a year, depending on what it needs. You really, really need to pay attention to the bottom branches and the strength. From the onset of doing anything, you need to balance the growth. The bottom of the tree oftentimes doesn't grow as strong as the top, the apex part of the tree. So you may need to push back hard on the top third or even half of the tree and hardly touch the bottom branches. And I have examples of what I'm talking about as we go along, but you'll see that by doing that, the tree will still grow strong, but those bottom branches will give you the size and girth that you need to you want to keep things in balance. You want to make those bottom branches look bigger than the top branches, right? And by reprogramming the tree, when you do start to get really strong growth on those lower branches, and then you do push them back in the fall, you're going to see a lot of back budding in the fall, in the next spring, because a lot of strength and energy has been programmed into those bottom branches. Yes.
Does it depend on what kind of tree it is? Like some trees have more apical growth, like a pine, but
So-
maybe an azalea
So
would be weak
typically,
at the
yeah,
top.
deciduous trees and broadleaf. So the question is, if you didn't hear, aren't certain trees less apical, less strong at the top and more even growth? And that could be true. And that's a very visceral response to the trees that you're growing. So if you see a tree that seems to be even growth all over and you don't have a problem with weak branches at the bottom and everything seems to be sort of staying in line, then prune accordingly. But my experience with, elms and maples and that kind of thing is that they do grow stronger at the top and require you to pay attention to your lower branches. Okay, broadleaf evergreens, same. My oaks, they grow very vigorously at the top of the tree and need to be pushed hard. Okay, but other things like myrtles and stuff like that, that are pretty uniform growth habit, you can begin to treat those profiles right from the get-go. Okay. Yes.
Do you let your bottom branches grow out maybe several feet the thickness?
So the question is, how much growth do you put on the bottom branches before you worry too much about them? If you had a tree that was growing really weak at the bottom and you were struggling trying to get any kind of good whips on those at all, you might not prune it at all for, a year or a year and a half. And as soon as you start to see it really take off, then you can maybe nip it out at the ends and try and create some back budding on it, but let it be strong until you feel like it is really performing like the rest of the tree. And then you can begin to profile prune stuff. I have a big elm, cork elm, that the bottom branch on it needed to be very strong in order to overcome a problem. And it was also weak to begin with. And, you know, I let it run probably two or 3 feet, and it had long whips on it and was strong. The gentleman that showed me how to treat bonsai was Kenji Miyata. And at one point he saw what I was doing with the bottom branch to try and create it. And he looked at it and he says, "No more." Just the end of it right there. So I started pushing it back, and my problem was overcome, and the tree started to balance. And that branch today is still very, very strong. That tree has been well programmed. It's been doing the job. That answer your question? Okay. So moving on. As the tree starts to mature and you've covered your scars and you're starting to build ramification and you've got all your branches in the right places and you're feeling pretty good about it, you're going to want to profile prune that tree as every time you touch it, or as much as you can. If you sense that any of the branches are starting to become a little weak as a result of that, you know, don't hesitate to let them run for a while and catch up. But, you know, just keep going back and forth until you get the thing growing evenly all over. That's really important. So also as the tree is maturing, you can begin to prune it more often. So I never prune trees much more than about overall, much more than about 3 or 4 times a year. Younger trees 2 to 3 times a year. And then even older mature trees, I like to let them run and keep their strength and just prune them, you know, as needed to maintain that fine twigging that you're looking for. So the way I look at it, or the way I've seen it in my garden, is that the spring growth is always the most vigorous. And so I let the trees run until they kind of feel like they're strong, and then I push them back. And that's generally on deciduous trees about mid-April, first part of May. And then later on, it's, you know, in the year, the growth is less vigorous, and I prune again by about mid-July on deciduous trees. And then one more time on the older trees, sort of towards the last 6 or 8 weeks of the growth cycle, sort of mid-September, first part of October, and they finish off. And that last growth bit is the least vigorous for the year, and that's when you get all that really fine branching and short internodes, and that's what you're looking for. That's when you start to get all that really nice twigging, and so you want to protect that as much as possible and profile prune right there. And you'll be really rewarded, because the following year, everything's going to sprout from all those smaller guys, and you'll be able to push it back to just 2 and keep it like that, and to get all this really nice twigging out there on the ends where you need it. You build up your ramification really fast that way. No questions. I love it. Okay, so I think that's, we can go to the next one, yeah? Yeah. So do you want to show this one last example then? Keep going? Yes. Oh, yes, sir.
Do you defoliate any of your trees early in order to reduce the size of the buds so the buds aren't so vigorous in spring?
So what I've found, and that's a really good question. He's asking, you know, defoliating. Elms have, as your root ball tightens up and you get a really solid core root ball going, and you're going to find that the leaf size and the internodes start to shrink automatically. Okay. And so I've never had to defoliate an elm. I haven't ever defoliated my oaks. but I'm thinking I need to start doing that and start building up the back budding and doing a little different thing. And so that's like a whole different topic right there. Maples, I've tried different techniques for ramifying maples, cut back. So if you've got, 2 leaves, cut one off, kind of do a directional thing by defoliating half of the tree, but leave leaves on. The problem I'm having in Southern California with defoliating maples is that we get these out of the blue hot flashes, hot spells, and it ruins all that new little growth if they're not protected. So it just comes out and gets going and burns. And so I need to put up shade cloth and stuff like that to start really be able to defoliate and maintain small. But the leaves that I have on my maples, because the root balls are really compact now, are no more than about a quarter anyway. So they're pretty good size. I really, really believe that the secret to good leaf size without defoliating is to maintain a nice tight core root ball. Yes, sir.
When you say maples, are you specifying trident maples or?
Tridents, I have no luck at all with Japanese maples.
Okay.
All of those have.
So you're talking specifically tridents. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions like that? No? Yes, ma'am.
So when you're talking about really dense root balls and
Uh-huh.
keeping them really dense, is there, is there anything more that you do than leave them in their pot until time to repot? I mean, how would you go about creating this really dense?
Okay, so the question is, how do you go about developing tight core, compact root balls? And I think the answer to that question is, just going through the process and maintaining. So when you field grow something, you don't ever get a tight root ball because everything's, running in the ground, right? And then when you dig it up, you've got these big coarse roots that you have to deal with. And so if they haven't been properly trained in the ground, then it makes it really, really tough because you have to go back and cut off all the big roots and you have a hard time with the fine roots. You haven't really developed a good solid core root ball. If you're growing things in colanders and that sort of thing, then you're not, they tend to run out of and you don't get that nice tight. So keeping them confined, and that's why I like the boxes, because it keeps it confined and lets it go through, but you still have a good core that's being developed. And believe me, that's not something that I just knew. That's something that I backed into, was one of those, let's try this, and it works. Yeah, pot will develop a core root ball, but the pots get hot and, you run into other problems. And so for development, it will, yes, that will work good too. Yeah. That's a good question. Anything else like that? No. Okay. I like to try, once the tree is balanced, I like to try and maintain the profile as much as possible and maintain even growth as much as possible. I tend to like to develop more branches than less. And then it's easy to take branches away when you want to start opening things up and creating nice tight ramification. But to do that initially while you're trying to develop your tree, it slows down the trunk thickening process. And if one of those branches that you're counting on were to get weak and die, then you're out of luck. So you'll see what I'm talking about. I develop trees that have lots of fine branches all the way through, and then as life goes along, and then I start to weed out extra branches. Okay. So Dodie, yeah. So I think what we have next, go for it. Okay, so this is an elm that I got a seedling that I picked up out of my yard when it was, a 1-year-old seedling, and I just moved it into a pot. I thought, being the thrifty soul that I am, here's a freebie, right? So it's about 18 or 20 years old, and I had it in a bonsai pot for a long time, and it started to get weak and was not performing well. And so I moved it back into a box, and I put feed on it because, I'm trying to still maintain it as bonsai ready for a pot. But this is, going on a second pruning in about, the time about July, I think. And so you can see that the growth pattern on it is fairly even all over. So it's responding well, it's happy, and everything's growing about the same, right? So I'm going to take it all the way back to 2 in every case. And that's how it looks after it gets pruned. And I'm at this point, I'm starting to open it up and give it, if this had a white background, you could see through. I have black backgrounds in my studio, but you can still see that there's kind of open areas in there, starting to thin it out, and it looks pretty happy. There's some branches down here that, weren't as strong as the others until I've left them to grow. But I'm looking forward to working on this winter and kind of really clean it up and start pushing it back and start to build that nice tight ramification that we all like.
When you're mentioning pushing it back, it's just more pruning, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So my sensei told me, that the most math that a bonsai artist needs to know is how to count to 2. Count your nodes. 1, 2, cut. So, okay. Yes, sir.
Do you ever do what's called compaction, where you just pinch the
I
first?
haven't done any pinching on my elms or my oaks. I know that you do that on junipers to avoid browning at the tips and stuff like that, but I don't do it I let these guys, like I said, I only prune on these 3 or 4 times a year. The more mature ones, the less mature, even less than that. And so you get these big long whips on there, and then you just use scissors on them. And you always cut about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch past. And I use directional pruning on all my stuff. And so, depending on which way you want the branch to go, you're going to cut. So, how on elms you get, a leaf, and then a little bit further out another leaf. And so if you want to grow the tree to the right, you cut where the bud's going to go to the right. If you want it to go to the left, you cut back one node to where it's going to go to the left. You all know that, right? Directional pruning, right? And to me, wiring branches, that only gives you soft curves. You can't get that nice aged look with sharp angled branches unless you are directional pruning. And that is the most attractive way to do it. The other thing I like to do is, instead of wiring branches down with wire, wrapping it on there, because when a tree gets really full like this, it's really hard to get in there and peel off all that wire. So what I do is I use these wooden boxes like this, and I pull branches down with a little piece of number 1, put a lath screw in the side here, and just loop a piece of number 1 over that and tie it off and pull it down. And you can use guy wires and wire a whole tree with guy wires. I've helped guys, with their elms, and we've had, like 18 or 20 guy wires all the way around, just pulling branches down or pulling them. If you want the branch to go sideways more, you can grab a hold of it and pull it around and tie it off over here. This is a really quick way, and you're never going to get any wire marks on your branches. And you can change them throughout the growth cycle. Even when a tree is full like this, it's really easy to get up in there and take it off and move it where you want it. So I'm a big fan of guy wires. Any other questions? Yes.
So you're saying you made this pruning and it's basically cut to 2 and it's shaped that beautifully?
Yeah. When they have even growth and you're cutting back, basically your profile pruning. So in some cases, Dodie, you're correct. Maybe there's, 3 or 4 leaves before you cut, but for the most part, the stronger branches, you're wanting to push back to 2. And the weaker branches, maybe you leave 3 or 4 or 5 on there, whatever it takes to maintain the profile. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? All right, I think we
No,
have
I have
one.
a follow-up on it.
Okay.
Sorry. So I thought if you let things run, then you're going to get longer internodes.
You will, and that's why you push them back. So as the branch grows, you're going to get, at first the internodes are pretty short. And then as it begins to extend, the internode gets longer and longer, okay? So when you prune, certainly in the beginning, you're going to prune back to the first set of the internodes in every case. And then you're going to get 2 more, and you're going to let those run, okay? And then you're going to push them back to 2. And then you're going to get 4, right? And then you're going to let them run, and you're going to push them back to 2, okay? And you keep doing that, and over a few years, you're going to start getting really nice ramification.
Okay, as a beginner, I remember hearing just go to 2. And so I'm out there every day. And if there's an extra leaf, I pin it back and I trip it back.
Let them run. It helps. If you're constantly pinching and poking at your trees, they're going to weaken. They need to grow. Trees, that's why you only want to work on them, 3 or 4 times a year on mature trees and only 2 or 3 times on younger trees. It's really, really important to let them run. Don't handle your trees all the time. They look a little shaggy for a while. It's part of the deal. What you got? Next one, yeah. Okay, so this is a cork bark oak that I grew in a box probably for about 15 years. I got it from a 3-gallon nursery stock. It was like a multi-trunk. It had, I think, maybe 4 trunks on it originally. And over time, I whittled it down to these 2. I put it into this pot this spring for the first time it went into a pot. And, I pushed back a little bit on the top and on the side over here the first time, but not much. But you can see that I'm pulling these branches down, but they're weak. These branches are weak by comparison to what's going on over here. Okay, so when I prune it this time, I'm going to push back the profile like this, but I'm not going to handle this very much. I'm going to, maybe do a little bit of wiring on this to kind of aim the direction, because the branches are kind of sticking up and they're not that strong yet. And so to pull them down with guy wires is a little bit tough. So I can use like number 1.5 or 1 aluminum on them and just bend them down slowly without giving them too much, without putting a lot of stress on them. And that'll go. So if we go to the next one, you can see what I'm talking about. So this now has just a little bit of wire on. I haven't even tightened up this to pull it down. And all of these branches are pretty much maintained just the way they were. And all of this has been pushed back as hard as I can to encourage some back budding. And so I get some more interior growth. But the profile's there for you. So this tree's got maybe another 2 or 3 years to give me some nice, more rounded shape like older trees get. And I would be kind of willing to show it at something local.
How do you do your guide wires? How are they held into the pot?
Pardon me?
How do you hold those guide wires in the pot?
Oh, okay. That's fun. So there's drain holes underneath here. So you can just slip wire up through the drain holes and make like little loops. And then just put like number one over the thing and pull it down and tie it off on those loops. It's not as convenient, and you can't do a lot of directional stuff that way. You can only mostly pull them down. You can't really move them forward or back too much like you could if you were in a box, okay? But you can still do it. And for the most part, by the time you get ready to put something in a pot, you've kind of got them going in the direction you want already. And now you're just trying to bring them down to give you that nice profile that you're looking for.
How do you get an oak tree to back bud?
That's a really good question. So if you've maintained the strength of those lower branches and now you're trying to get it to back bud, and you've let them run and there's a lot of energy there and you know that for a fact, then when you cut them back hard, it's going to push from back inside. Now, what I have found is that you start to get the best back budding in the spring pruning. So if you've got a tree that, my oaks start to push out in the mid-March is when they start to come, first part of April. So I don't really do my first pruning on them until sort of mid-June, end of June, first part of July. That's about when I come in on those, depending on how strong they're growing. If that branch, say I hadn't touched that branch for a full year and it was growing really strong now, I know that when I cut that back to a pair of leaves, that I'm going to start getting a lot of back budding behind it, because all that energy that it's been pushing there is going to continue to want to go someplace. All right. But it's really, really important to maintain the strength of those bottom branches. Oaks are notorious for wanting to grow up. I push back on this guy on the top probably 3 or 4 times a year. Push back hard, okay, and open it up and do all kinds of things to try and minimize the strength at the top of the tree and force it to give me what I want out on the ends. You want to take a break, Tim? Yeah. Is it too early? If I keep going, we'll be done, really. Okay.
How would you recommend I shrink my ginkgo leaves?
Say it again.
How would you recommend I shrink the leaves on my ginkgo?
Shrink the leaves on your ginkgo. Ginkgos are that's a tough one, because ginkgos don't like to shrink their leaves very much. Even when you get tight core root balls, they shrink by about 2/3 of what they are. I mean, those are on regular trees are, what, about the size of a little bit bigger than a silver dollar, 2 inches across. The smallest leaves I've ever seen on a ginkgo are about 1.5 inches. They just don't get really dinky like you want. But ginkgos look the best in the fall. And those big, bright, clean yellow leaves, there's just nothing more pretty than that. As your core root ball gets tighter, you're going to find that you get better ramification. And that's the tricky part of ginkgos, because they have those big, broad leaves. They don't ramify as nicely as maybe some other ones. But I have a friend who has a ginkgo that he's had for a number of years now, and it's got a really, really tight core root ball, and he is building ramification on it. It's just stunning. So if you can get, that would be what you should go for, is good. Yeah. And then get good ramification. I know you want to add in, Kathleen, go. Oh, there's a small leaf variety. Okay. Yes.
I have I have one ginkgo that is 2 years old, and then I got a couple, it may be a little bit older, but I've had it for 2 years. And I got some in the spring, that were small, some very small pots. But neither one, either the one from last year or any of them this year turned that beautiful gold. The leaves are gone and they just sort of turned sort of brown and with an attempt to be yellow. Am I missing something there, or is that just a life cycle kind of thing?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and tell you that fertilization schedule on ginkgos is tricky. To get them to go nice and gold, you have to fertilize and you have to keep them clean and clear, right? So what you want to do is you want to fertilize up until about, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks, maybe 12 weeks before the cold is going to come, and then quit fertilizing, and they will give you that gold, okay? But Kathleen had some really nice gold on hers this year. Maybe she has something that would help you for this area. So I know for example, that in Southern California, we get this hot, dry stuff right at the end of the summer. Okay. And, the trees have lost their energy and they're starting, and then that hot, dry, the Santa Ana conditions come along, and it just kind of, the trees just dry, the leaves just kind of start drying out, and they turn that kind of ugly brown and then fall off, and we never really get good color. This year, the end of the summer stayed cool, and then we got a whole bunch of nice rain, and then it went cold, and bingo, we got color. So I think that if there was, if a lot of it has to do with, the weather cycle, and you just have to be patient with it and see how it goes. But I also know that a good friend, my friend that does have a really old ginkgo, fertilized his a little bit too late in the season. And so when it went cold, it didn't color up as nicely as it could have, because he had given it too much fertilizer too late in the season. Had he not, maybe he backed it off by, 3 or 4 weeks. When we had that cold snap, he would have had a gorgeous looking tree.
Just to confirm, because again, I'm relatively new at this, it sounds like the secret to success on this is that root ball.
Yes, ma'am. That's my belief.
Okay.
The tighter and more ramified your core root ball is, the better you're going to have, better luck you're going to have on the top.
Okay. And okay, I'm going to just keep listening, because it seems everything's is circled around that root ball. And you're just confirming what I'm understanding.
Okay. Does anybody want to add to that? Has anybody had a similar experience? Pardon me? That's it in a nutshell. As below, so above. Oh, core, yeah, okay. So the question is, how do we get the tight core root ball? And, rapid growth in a good root environment, and maintaining the roots. Like I repot every 2 to 3 years, depending on the health of the tree. And I push my root balls back hard, and so, and then give them plenty of drainage and good soil. And so as you do that year over year, after about 10 or 15 years, you will start to develop a good tight core root ball, and then you will start to see the results in the way the tree grows up above. Okay? Yes, sir.
How hard do you cut back your tap roots?
The tap roots I cut off. So I will, in the early, when I was first starting, before anybody told me otherwise, I would turn my trees over, put a couple of sticks on the end of a bench like this and pad them, and turn my root balls over and let my tree hang down. And I'd take 1-inch chisels and chisel off any tap root that was there to to keep it nice and flat. And then the following years, as that scar begins to happen, you know, it starts to roll over, then you go back and you keep it shaved back. And what's going to happen is that during that process, you're going to force all those roots right above where you've cut it off. And, you know, so you start getting a lot of lateral roots right in there. And by giving it the right kind of soil up above, you're going to start to develop that nice nerve. It's going to just happen. Okay. I like to keep my, my root balls mostly buried until I start to see that nerve going. And then I start to expose it slowly over a period of time. If you expose that top roots too soon, then you get big roots. They start to swell too early and they don't match in size to the trunk. You know, nothing looks worse than to have a 1-inch trunk with a 1-inch root coming off of it, right?
When you remove the taproot, do you put sealer on there?
No, never put any sealer on your roots. And that brings up another interesting point. This weekend at a workshop, somebody was using copper wire on to tie their trees down and hold things in position underneath the soil. Copper is only used on the branches. You want to use it up above it. It oxidizes and poisons the roots if you leave it in this under the soil. Only use aluminum under the soil. Okay. So at the onset of this, I think I told you all that I never really intended to be showing bonsai. I was just doing it as a fun thing to do, right? And in the most economical way I could think of doing it. And it wasn't until I started getting, you know, fairly decent trees that I even began to think about showing them. And so when I did finally start to show trees, the people that I showed the first time at Bikoin, you know, they all came to me and said, "Where did you buy that tree?" And I told them I had gotten it, you know, 20 years ago from Kimura, for instance. And it was just a twig. And then they wanted to see pictures and they couldn't believe that, you know, somebody had grown a tree like that. And you'll see what I'm talking about. And I had to go back and prove to a lot of guys that I had grown those trees from scratch. And so the first questions they came to me with was, how did you do that? And that's why I have started doing these kind of stories, you know, of how I did that with the boxes and all of that business. So let me show you really quickly, you know, in progression photos, what I'm talking about. Are you able to, you lost me, huh? Oh, we're there? Okay. So yeah, keep going, keep going. So this is a cork bark elm that I bought from Bob Pressler at Kimura Nursery in like what, 1997. So not too long after he opened up. And when I first started looking for material, I like corky bark. It looks really cool to me. So I went looking for specific kinds of trees. Cork elms were really attractive. There weren't very many nurseries that actually were carrying deciduous trees, and of those, there weren't too many that actually had cork elms. Bob Pressler had when he took over Kimura Nursery, there was a big cork elm growing at the back of the property, and when the owners that had just left had cut it down, and a lot of sprouts were coming up from the roots, and he started collecting those and generating material. So when I went to see him, he had a really nice one growing in about a 5-gallon pot, nursery pot. And I looked at it and I said, "How much for that one?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't want to sell that one. Can't have that. That's going to be mine." And I turned around and looked at it. I saw another one over here in a 3-gallon pot. And I said, "How about that one?" And he goes, "Probably not going to sell that one right now either. I need to work on that a little bit more." And he turns around and he goes, "But you can have this one over here." And it was like this little tiny 1.5-inch trunk that kind of came up and made a hard left and looked really stupid. But it was a cork elm and I could buy it. And I said, "How much?" And he goes, $30. And I said, "Deal." So this is that tree after about 8 or 10 years growing it in a box. And you can see that being a real novice, I was doing things kind of wrong. You know, the first thing right off is that this first branch is a pocket branch. It's growing on the inside of a curve rather than on the outside of the curve. So this looks kind of awkward. It's not as nice as if you had put it over here. I also have like a bar branch, and I have branches growing up, you know, which older trees don't really necessarily have those kinds of things. And typical bonsai, you know, you pull the branches down, you get things growing laterally and down to give them that nice look, okay? So there were several things I needed to overcome, but I'd taken care of the main scar. I mean, it came up like here and it had jetted out that way, and I had taken that off and gotten, you know, all of this growth as a result after about 8 or 10 years. So we go to the next one. So this is how it looks midsummer before pruning. You can see I'm using, you know, guy wires to pull down all my branches. You know, I'm really yanking on them. This is the first branch right here, and it's, you know, it's growing like a weed right now. I'm letting it run as much as I can. But the growth pattern is pretty even all over, okay? This is its first pot. A couple of years later, you can see that this pocket branch is starting to fill in really nice because as a result of me letting that run and pushing it back, and I'm starting to get a lot of fine twigging on here, and I'm feeling pretty good about it, and I'm starting to take pictures of it. Woohoo. Got a little digital camera and I'm out there snapping photos now, right? You can also see that I didn't have a back branch on this tree, which was a real problem. And so we did a thread graft right through here. And you can see I had just cut it off, and there's the thread graft and the whip, because I'm going to let that grow freely for a while so it can catch up to some of these other branches and begin to look like it had been there the whole time. This is the second pot. What is it about now? It's been after about 15 years of, you know, and it's starting to really, really develop that nice profile. Everything's growing real even, and I've got a lot of nice fine twigging on it. And I'm really getting proud of this tree. This is the first show that I was ever in. This is the tree at Bikoin. This is when people started coming to me and going, how did you do that? So this is about 20 years in, right? And you can tell that there's, you know, doesn't really look like a pocket branch anymore. And we don't have any, not very much bar branches. Everything is, you know, nicely, you know, a lot of fine ramification on it. It's beginning to develop a lot of surface rootage, although my moss job here, you can't really see it. That's one of the big gripes I have about people letting moss bound up over top and that hides all of that stuff. Later on, I learned that you need to pull that down and show off all of that nice fine nerve that's going on. Bob Pressler was in this show with me, and I hadn't really talked to him since I bought that tree initially. And I reintroduced myself to him. And I said, gee, I don't know if you remember me, but, you know, and he I kind of have to remember. And I said, well, I bought a cork elm from you, and that's it. And he looked at it and went, okay. And he walked down there to take a look at it. And for the rest of the day, he kept going, he bought that from Kimura. That was my vindication, okay? So here's that same tree this year at Bikoin. And you can see that, you know, I'm starting to show, I've learned to show a lot of that nice nerve that's going on there. I like to put little grass and stuff to help with the scale. I know everybody goes, what are you putting weeds in there? But I think it looks good. Is there any questions about any of this so far? Yeah. Yeah. So she's asking me, am I calling it Nabari? And yes, I am. Surface roots. And you know, I uncover that slowly over a period of time, because as you begin to uncover it, it starts to swell faster. And so this stuff looks, you know, really in tune with the, you know, the trunk itself. It doesn't look oversized or anything like that. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
I don't know how to say it. Can you say how much wider the tree is in that picture than it was 2 pictures back or something?
How, okay, so what's the dimension here versus what it was 2 times back? So I'm continuing to push this tree back as much as possible, so that it's really only growing laterally and vertically, you know, half an inch or an inch a year. But if you go back 2 slides and let me look at it, maybe I can give you a better, yeah. So here, okay, it's probably about 6 or 8 inches wider and about 4 or 5 inches taller than what it was. Most of the growth now is in the twigging and in the swelling of the trunk, but it maintains a really nice taper all the way to the top. You know, and I get that question a lot. You know, when I first started this, I never expected to have anything like this. It just was not in my wildest dreams. It wasn't going to happen. I was, you know, a backyard guy, and I kind of worked, you know, when I started getting really good trees and taking pictures of them, I was proud on my own, but I didn't think they were like what I saw the Japanese guys doing. So it wasn't until I really started showing trees and people started giving me feedback that I realized, okay, so there must be something I'm doing a little different than everybody else. And so I'm just telling you what I do to make trees like this. All right. So to the patience thing, it is what it is. I mean, you know, I don't have a magic wand then can tell you that, you know, if you do what I'm doing, you're 20 years from now, you're going to have that. I just, you know, I don't know that, but it has worked for me over the last 25 years. Okay. Every year it grows a little more and it ramifies a little more, and it's just like unwrapping a package. When the leaves come off and you start to see what you have, it's just thrilling. And every year it gets a little better. And so it's a process. And, you know, over 25 years, I'm there now. And it's like, when I got this tree and repotted it this year, I could not quit staring at it. It was just that much fun. And go next one. Okay, so this is a cork oak. And when I first was starting out and wanted corky material, I knew that there were cork oaks out there and available, but I couldn't find any. And so I went in driving around in areas where you weren't supposed to be collecting trees, and I saw a cork oak growing in an oil refining utility yard. And it was kind of out in the pathway, and a truck had run over this and smashed. They'd probably run over the trunk right here and sort of smashed down the tree, and it was like growing off at an angle like that. It was maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet tall. And I went over there on a Sunday afternoon and dug it up. So I got the other one for 30, and I got this one for free. And this is it after about, you know, 10 years or so and growing in the box. It's starting to fill in really nice. I got a new digital camera, and I went out and was trying out my camera and took pictures of my tree. And that's when I took a picture of this. I never intended to show this, but I'm really happy that I took pictures. And I would suggest to all of you, whenever you start working on your trees, take pictures before and after you work on them, and particularly when you first start them out, because maybe 20 years from now, when people are going, yeah, you bought that from somebody, she didn't do it. You can say, I did it. It was me. All right. So as it started to fill out, you know, I, being the novice that I was, the backyard guy, I said, hey, let's put it on a slab, see how that looks, you know, oak on the hill kind of a thing. So this slab was about maybe 2.5 feet long and about, you know, 16 inches wide. And I put it on that little mound, drilled holes in the slab and put it on the, you know, it's just a, you know, what do you call a muck wall and filled with bonsai soil and put moss on it. And I was really proud of it. Took all kinds of pictures, put it on Christmas cards. This was me being really happy with what things were going. I'm starting to share it with my family and stuff. I also showed this tree like this to Kenji Miyata, my sensei. And he looked at this and he goes, no good, hot. So the following year, we put it into a pot, and I'll show you. And I worked really hard to find this pot. And then, you know, Kenji and I popped it in here. He turned the tree around. He did not like those big, you know, that big ugly root that was coming across. You can kind of see it back here. But, you know, this is that funny looking part of the trunk right here. And this is what the backside of the tree looked like. He cut off, you can see here where he cut off another branch that was kind of coming straight at you to kind of open it up a little bit. So I wasn't too happy with it. I liked it on the mound better, but this is what the boss said to do. You go with the boss, right? So here we go. It's starting to fill in. I'm starting to feel a little better about it. Starting to take on a nice profile. Trunk's starting to swell. So this, I think, is about 2 years later. When it got to this stage right here, I moved it into, you know, a used kind of Chinese pot with nice soft round corners. It was deep. Oak trees like really deep pots. They like to have they like to stay moist and get lots of drainage. And so I like to put them in deep pots. And, you know, the trunks being wide like this really support. It's okay to do that visually. It looks pretty good. I go back one. Let me finish still. When it got to this stage right here, I entered this in the show that Ryan Neal did up there. What was the Artisan's Cup? And it was accepted to be in the Artisan's Cup at this stage right here. Okay. As it was getting on the truck at the Huntington Library to go up north, so the trees were all supposed to be there, I think, on Friday morning. So on Wednesday afternoon, they were loading up at the Huntington. This tree, a Naka olive, and one of Ted Matson's trees were the only trees really coming from Los Angeles area. And then it was going to go up to Bob Shyman's and get all the stuff from Northern California, and it was going to go up into Oregon. Bob Shyman has a license to be able to move nursery material in and out of the state. Then had I tried to do that on my own without the permits and the certifications, they would have confiscated this at the border coming back in and put it in quarantine. And, you know, it probably would have killed it. So that was really the only way to do it. The other thing was that Ryan was really, really careful about how he was going to display trees. So trees would arrive on the trucks. Drivers would walk away. They would unload the truck, move the trees in, and stage them. And then you never touched your tree again until they brought it out and loaded it in the truck, and you could drive it home. So it was really a hands-off kind of deal. Ted had just loaded this on the truck to leave on Wednesday afternoon, and he noticed in the front part of this right area right in here, a hole with a little kind of bleeding coming out of it. And at that time, there was this shot hole borer infestation going on in Southern California, and it was attacking oaks and avocados and some citrus trees and maples and things like that. The Huntington had a really bad infestation of that stuff, and Ted saw it and kind of wondered about it and called the entomologist over, and the entomologist Tim Tebow came over and took a look at it and goes, yeah, I think that's what it is. And Ted called me and said, what do you want to do? Well, I'm not going to be the guy that introduces shot hole borer to Oregon. So I said, no, it's not going. Take it off. So the day the tree was going to leave, but there's not any alternate or backup plan or anything like that. So I'm out of the show, which is really a drag, right? So, and I went and picked up my tree the next day. I never saw a problem after that. So, real kick in the fanny, right? So that's the deal. So, okay. I told my story. This is about 2 years or 3 years later at the Huntington at a CBS show, how it looked then. You can see that, you know, it's got a little bit more lean to it, and I'm starting to run this branch a little bit to give it a nice look. It's in a bigger pot. This is unfortunate, you know, it's really hard to find good Japanese pots that are over 20 inches. And I needed something that was more like 22, 23 inches. And so I had to buy an inexpensive Chinese pot. That's really all I could find. So I tried to find something that was appropriate for this, about the right color, and that was about the best I could do. And up until, you know, this year, I haven't had any other alternatives. So I've kept this tree in that pot now for ever since whatever this was, 2020. So I've had it in this pot for already 2 years, and I've got it in there for another transplanting. So 4 years in that pot. And I think I'm going to be able to get something else soon, but I'm working on it. So here's what it looks like now. This is the picture that I took just before it went up to the Pacific Bonsai Expo. This is how it looked at the show, at Pacific Bonsai Exhibition. So I did something a little bit unusual. I have kind of a big knob on this side of the trunk, and it's pretty, there's hardly any nervae that shows on this side. It's pretty flat. And so to balance out that look, I planted some like little seasonal grass weeds kind of thing in here. And you can see that visually that kind of gives it some weight, makes it look interesting, keeps it kind of, I got a lot of flack for that. I mean, I brought it in, I set it up, and you know, one of the guys that put the show together came by and he goes, "You got weeds." Yeah, what you would expect to see there. I had another lady come over to me after I was just finishing setting up, and she goes, "I need to talk to you about your moss job." and I said, "Sure, let's talk." And she goes, "Well, later." Well, I'm not going to go find her to find out how bad she thought I did on my moss job, but she did come to me at the end of the day, and she said, "Okay, let's talk." And I said, "Have you ever read the John Naka books?" And she goes, "Yeah, I have." And I said, "Okay." So this idea comes straight out of John Naka. This is what he says to do when you have a place that is kind of got a hole in it, and you want to show and you want to make it look natural. You plant something right there, kind of cover it up. And I said, and she goes, "Oh." And I said, "Look how it balances out." "Oh, I get it." I said, "Thanks." So any questions? I'm not going to say. Is there any questions? Yes, sir.
So to get strong like backbudding, kind of like what was mentioned earlier, to get strong backbudding on the cork oaks, you said you let the branches run, and then what what time of year do you normally cut them back to, in order to force that energy back
Okay,
closer
so
to the trunk?
again, on oaks, this tree and any of the oaks that I have, the top third of the tree grows really, really strong. And so I'm constantly pushing that back. This area right here is weak. So I hardly ever prune in here. This year, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to rebox this tree this year in anticipation of being able to get another pot in the not too distant future. And I'm going to try and put it in something a little bit larger and feed it and start trying to reinvigorate it a little bit. And then by this time next year, I'm going to start, well, actually, a year from this March, coming March, I will go in and try to defoliate most of the top 2/3 of the tree and partial defoliation on the bottom part of this tree. I'm going to do a lot of selective pruning and start to develop the branches a little bit differently to create a little bit more air through there. And hopefully by doing that and not touching too much of this, when it starts to push, it's going to push stronger from here. And I'm going to let that run for a full year and try to get a lot of strength back into that branch. And then by the end of that year, I'll be able to push it back and it'll be ready to go into a pot. But good question and thank you. Anybody else have anything?
Probably down. How do you tell the difference between a Japanese and Chinese pot?
Oh, probably, I don't know that in some cases, the Japanese even use Chinese pots. And so it's a question of the quality of the pot and the age of the pot. This is like a production pot from China and yeah. And it just looks like a production pot from China. It doesn't have any, handmade qualities to it. It doesn't have any kind of age showing on it. It looks like a new pot and it looks like a production pot. And it was probably made from a mold. These kind of cloud feet you find on almost every single imported, low cost Chinese pot. They bang those out by the millions. They probably have a guy that just sits there and all day long, that's all he does is make, cloud feet so that, and then somebody else glues them on and that's the deal, But it's not a very good pot for this tree. And I got dinged for that. That's a big tree. This trunk right here now is almost 12 inches across. And that tree from the lip of the pot to the top of the tree is just under 40 inches. And this distance across right here is probably about 42 or 43 inches. Yes. So that's where I'm going to get a pot. I'm going to go to Now and get a pot. And he pretty much told me that he can make the size that I want. It's just, what do I want? So the pot that was in before this, that antique Chinese pot that was kind of rounded with pushed in soft corners, I'm going to go back to that style. That looked really good. And it will, this one. And he has now makes, in some cases, not all, but he has mined his own clay from shore cliffs in Oregon. So I call it his Oregon clay. But when he leaves that unglazed and fires it a certain way, he gets all kinds of nice visual texture to it. Plus he kind of leaves a rough surface on it, which I think will add tremendously to that combination there. It'll give a nice contrast that's dark purple clay with a kind of a rough visual roughness to it will work really good against that trunk. Now, NAO, and he's housed up in Portland, Oregon. Toki Bonsai, I think is how you would pronounce his last name. Tutaki? Yeah, Tutaki. And now Tutaki, and his website is Tutaki Bonsai. And if you look on there, he has a nice gallery of pots. He's very reasonable. He showed up at the Pacific Bonsai Expo with, 270 pots. And I think he left with about 10 or 15. I mean, he just sold out. And I'm surprised that somebody didn't go to him, with what was left and say, I'll take them all and offer him a price. I mean, he is that good. He really makes classic looking stuff, but it's extremely well made, well crafted, and he's got a real good eye. Yes, sir.
Earlier, you're talking about pruning and how you cut it back to 1 or 2 buds. But say you're working with a tree that has pretty leggy growth, and you want to get it back closer towards the trunk. How confidently I know oaks, there's so many of them and they all react differently, but with cork oaks, for example, how confidently can you cut behind that growth?
So I would, not having tried every single option you have, like at the end of the summer, cutting it back and see if you get any budding. I haven't done that just because I'm nervous and might not get it and kill a branch. But what I do know is that I have another cork oak, and I'll share a good story here. I bought something originally from that was in a 3-gallon can that was about 3.5 inches in diameter, like this. Okay, and I planted it as a yard tree in sort of the mid-February time frame. Okay, and planted it in the yard and staked it up, and it was maybe 12 or 16 feet tall. By mid-March to the first part of April, the gophers had completely chewed off the roots and it was laying on the ground. And I dragged it into my studio and I cut it off on the bottom, and I cut it off to be about 16 inches long. And I put it in a bucket of pure akadama and watered the heck out of it and pushed it up against a wall in sort of semi-shade. Within 6 or 8 weeks, it had sprouts all over it. And today, that tree is almost as tall as this one, or as tall as this one, and as wide as this one, and has a trunk on it that's about 11.5 inches in diameter. And you can't even see where the cutoff was anymore. So to answer your question, I think if you do it at the right time of year and it's got a lot of strength, it will give you the back budding you're looking for. I'm hoping that by doing this process, creating a really strong growth and putting it in new soil and giving it a year to kind of establish itself, that I'll be able to defoliate it and go in and do a lot of selective pruning and start to build out a different kind of style here and get a lot of back budding on it and really create a totally different look for this tree. Okay, so the deal is that the tree that I have now has what some people would say has more of a shohin kind of look, where you can't really develop into small branching because the tree is so small. You just create this nice round crown. And so when you do that on larger trees, you immediately kind of limited the way people can see it, right? So by going in and creating a different kind of branching structure where you have kind of more openings and individual kind of branches, and you let the tips kind of grow up and show more branching structure, you get more of a natural oak tree look. And so I think I'm at a point with this tree where it's got good size and pretty good movement. And I think I can go back and restyle it some to give it a more natural oak tree look. Ask me in 5 years if I made a mistake.
Any luck thread grafting oaks?
Pardon me?
Any luck grafting oaks?
Okay, so thread grafting is the way to work on oaks. Grow a nice whip, push it through, just drill you can, I know you can defoliate oaks if you do them in the early spring, just as they're getting ready to push. Okay, and so you drill a little bit oversized hole, you push your whip through, take the leaves off and push your whip through. Use that gray grafting paste. People call it plumber's putty, but not really. But just a little bit oversized. You don't want to damage the buds as you go through. So just a little bit oversized, be really careful, and then just put the grafting paste around there and let it do its thing. You don't need to cut back to the cambium layer or anything like that. As the branch begins to grow and swell, it'll just do its magic. You'll get a big lump on the other side, and at some point you'll see that this side isn't growing much and that side's still growing. You've got it. Give it another 6 or 8 months and cut off the inside, the one coming through, and shape it up and let it go.
You said it was before bud break in spring.
Pardon me?
Before bud break in spring is when you would do that?
Yeah, I would do it. Just when an oak is starting to push, because the older last year's growth starts the ones on the inside start to turn yellow and drop off, and you see all the buds starting to swell. That means the roots are starting to generate new growth, and that's a good time just before you get the leaves to take off what the old leaves and go through. You also want to make sure that when you do that, that you leave the inner nodes that you want to use the correct distance from the trunk, because those are going to be your first branches, right? So you're going to come through and you're not going to leave the first set of nodes right at the trunk or 6 inches out from the trunk. You're going to try and put them at about, 2 inches out or something like that. Okay. Good question.
I have a question from the chat. At some point, let's see, could you ask him about defoliating? Does he do it and how?
Okay. I have not defoliated my oaks in the past. I have had experience where I can see that would be okay to do, but I haven't had to. Generally defoliate so that you can get in and see the structure inside, and also to create some back budding. And I haven't really had a problem with that. I get back budding, but the tree is starting to get large enough now where the interior branches are starting to die a little bit. And I need to shape it a little differently. And so I believe that defoliating is going to help me achieve that. But I don't have a lot of experience with it. I know from when I lost what I call the gopher tree that it will work. I just have to be careful about when I do it and make sure that the tree has lots of vigor when I get ready to do it. I don't want to do it on a weak or struggling tree thinking that somehow that's going to magically give it strength. I don't think that's true. Yes, sir.
You have any experience air layering oaks?
Air layering oaks. I think that would be fine. Basically I had a big giant cutting. When the gophers chewed that off and I cut it off top and bottom, that's just a big giant cutting. I planted it and it grew. So I would imagine that if you strip the bark back and back to your cambium layer and you pack it in nice sphagnum moss with lots of rooting hormone, that you would be able to generate roots out of there and go for it. I know a cutting works, so I'm pretty sure that would work just fine. So if you have a branch that needs to come off and you'd like to turn it into something, try it. I'm pretty sure you're going to have good success. I would try and do that, right at the start of the season. So right about mid-March to the first part of April, for me in my garden is about that time. It might be a little bit later up here. I don't know, but I'd give it a go. You can tell, again, when the roots are starting to push down below, because the old interior leaves are going to start turning yellow and dropping off. There's nothing wrong. That just means that the roots are starting to push, and you're going to start to see the nodes on the out tips starting to push as well. Okay. And so that would be a good time to go in and strip the bark back on the branch you want to capture and pack it and make sure you use really good rooting hormone. I don't know. There's a rooting hormone that's called Hormex, and it's the strongest. It's like 3.1 or 3.6 or something in that range, as opposed to what you buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, which is basically for leaf cuttings. And that's like 0.04 or something. So it's that active ingredient on woody material that really generates the rooting. Okay. Hormex. Look that and get the really strongest one you can. It's not cheap. A little bottle of that stuff costs like 25 bucks. You can also buy a 1 pound for a little over $100 and use that when you're transplanting trees and stuff like that and kind of give them an extra boost. I've never done that, but I know it works. Yeah. Hormex, that's the brand.
For something where we were talking about shrinking the root ball back,
Uh-huh.
if I'm doing that, am I repotting once a year or is that too often?
If it's a deciduous tree, every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Okay, depending on the strength of the tree. If this tree has been growing really, really strong for 2 years, then you're probably that's probably a good time to go. If it was a little weak the first year and then started to pick up steam on the second year, give it a third year. I will caution about going too long between repottings, because you can get out into the root ball will get overly compact in about July. And now you're playing, careful for the rest of the year through all the hot part of the season and all that stuff, and you spike in the soil to try to get water down into the root ball and all kinds of tricks. So you don't want to, it's a visceral response more than anything. You just have to pay attention to how the tree's going. Yes, sir.
When you're deciding that you're going to put a tree into a grow box, what factors are you considering when you decide on the dimensions to make your box?
Good question. So so in this case, can you put that back up, Jody? The last slide. Yes. So when I transplanted this 2 years ago, this root ball was only about that deep. So like about that out of 5 inches. I've got, 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches of drainage underneath this tree. I'm sure right by now that's pretty full, but I will shave this back to almost that same place and push these sides back to a pretty compact and put it into a box that is just a little bit larger than probably the size of this lip and about that deep. Okay, just as a rule of thumb, that's about where I'm going to go. So I'll give myself, because I want to really give this tree a lot of strength going forward with what I'm trying to do. I'm going to give it about 2 inches all the way around and a good 2 inches or 2.5 inches underneath it. And I'll put handles on the box so that my daughter and I can lift it easily and put it out in full sun and feed it vigorously and push hard on the top and really concentrate on letting those bottom branches run. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So if you were buying nursery stock that was maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches in diameter, right? And you're in the nursery grow pot, the nursery plastic was like this big, give yourself lots of space. Cut it short underneath, get out all the big heavy roots that are growing straight down, and concentrate on keeping as much of the fine roots up above as you can. get rid of all the stuff that's going around in circles and crossing over. Try to do as much of that as you can. You don't have to do it all at once, but do the really problematic stuff first. Tie it in really, get it on top of a good drainage layer and on top of good soil and work it in and tie it down really good and give it plenty of room to grow laterally. And then let it go for 2 or 3 years until you're comfortable that it's really got a lot of vigor, and then repeat the process and keep doing that. You'll be able to use that same grow box, for 2 or 3 times, anywhere from 5 to 6, 8 years.